We are, we've gotten the names across and everything, but we're a part of a company called Health Connective. Some of the faces I recognize from getting to go out to the meeting and everything this year, so it's a pleasure to get to meet everybody in person. But what we do is we've worked in medical device companies for more than 20 years now, and we'll talk about this in a future slide here in just a bit. But one of the things that we do focus on are dashboards quite a bit. And when we talk about dashboards in particular, you know, understanding exactly like when physicians and engineers and all the different folks that would use these different dashboards, like when they're actually using it. So we interact with dashboards, the types of dashboards that we develop and design, and all of those good systems that go around it, right? The portals and logging in and all the security that needs to happen. These are dashboards for before the procedure, for planning out the procedure, or for after the procedure. So it's not something where a surgeon or a bronchoscopist or whomever is looking over at our screen while they're in the middle of the procedure. It's afterwards. It's understanding how the procedure went. And I tweaked the title, Justin and I tweaked the title some for this to talk about making your dashboards worth coming back for. Because this is definitely a pain point that we've heard with some of the different clients that we've worked with. Like, yes, we did all the good work of getting the thing built out. We talked to people about what they wanted, and then we had very low engagement after it got up and live. So trying to make sure that you're developing a tool that's going to be useful enough for all of these different audiences to want to come back, to keep on seeing what's happening with it. So let's talk about why. I mean, we talked just a second about like getting people to actually come back, but we all know that these devices, these robotic devices and all of these kinds of things that are in the procedures themselves create an immense amount of data. Justin, one of the big clients that we're working with right now, for each procedure, how much data is coming off of that device?
Geez, it's many gigabytes at least. It's a ton of data per procedure. It's like just vast. It takes ages for them to process a single case.
Yeah, so you've got all this information.
Sorry, so like a reprocessing is like hours. Like it can be like you'll get that reprocessed like a day later for like a single case.
Yeah, so you've got this ton of information that's coming off of a device, and then some of the different surveys that we were looking at was saying that like 90% of that data at hospital level can go unused. So yes, we're getting all this data, but what are we actually doing with it? How are we actually making it useful for people to want to engage and to be able to make it actionable to actually improve patient care? All of these topics that we have listed here are pretty closely related. So you've got all this information. Surgeons, we know, are busier than ever. All of the different people that are running procedures are busier than ever, so they don't have time to just look at sort of that like extremely dense dashboard and try to pick out all the data points that they need. They need a very clear path to follow when they get in and interact with these things. And these dashboards can be a very important value add to the device you're selling. It can really help go beyond just the procedure itself. And we've even talked, some of the different clients that we're working with are looking at what their commercialization opportunities are around the dashboards themselves. So there are additional opportunities beyond that.
Let me, I'd like to, and maybe your next slide, it's pretty much your next slide. Just, I want to understand your part of that value. Do you help people with the UI as well? Or is it just show me the device you have, let us understand what the data is, and let us fashion a way to synthesize it?
Justin, I'm going to let you answer that one since you're more closely involved with that.
We cover both sides of it depending on the needs of the individual customer. Some of them, they're exporting their data out and they said, here it all is. We kind of have an idea that this is what's going to be useful. Can you kind of dig through it all and organize it, collate it into something meaningful and present it? We're always the ones doing the UI. That's something we always do. So we build the actual application itself. We do the presentation of the dashboard. We handle all of the organization, all of the user experience, how you navigate, not just the dashboard, but then you almost always need to drill down in some ways. There's usually ancillary administrative needs that are around it. So we build out all of that for them. Sometimes they have a very clear understanding of their data. They may have a data team that specifically handles that. They may have data analysts who handle some of the understanding of the data. They may be internally creating some kind of views into it. but usually that's very difficult to expose out to a broader audience. They maybe are writing Python scripts, generating some like Tableau views, but that's just useful for like that person. And we're trying to, what we largely do is make this available to wider audiences that need to see this in some useful way and don't have a lot of like technical know-how for some of these specific tools.
I'm sure if I were to ask you, when's the ideal time to bring on a team like yours, you and everyone else would say as soon as possible so we can understand the strategy and begin to la, 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 la. But does that actually happen for you? Or is it always like, here's the device, here are the points of data I get, now help us? Or do they ever, are you ever working with a product development team at the R&D level and your prototypes and like, what is the interface like? And
yeah,
like
absolutely. So we've worked both ways. I think that it's been a smoother process when we're brought in earlier with R&D. With that, they were trying to get ahead of, they knew they were going to need this. They knew they wanted to get information in front of physicians. They knew they needed to be supporting their engineering team once they were making sales and getting robots into hospitals. So they brought us on board at that point, and we built out a tremendous number of various portals to support different use cases and different groups internally and externally. That helped because it wasn't trying to retrofit something after the fact. We have another client we're actually working with actively right now who did it the other way around. They had their device, they uploaded it to their own database, and they built a desktop application just for their internal engineers that's agonizingly slow. You need specific configurations to get that working. And they're realizing now, hey, we need to get this information to our physicians, and we have no way to do that. What we have is completely unworkable. So they brought us on board, and we're building that out. And they're eventually going to retire their own tool, and we're going to build like dashboards and portals and whatnot for them to replace what they've already built. So what they did got them off the ground, but they probably could have saved some time and had some reusability for what their engineers needed and what their physicians that are trying to get out need.
Rains is one of 4 people who specialize in quality. I see Nellie is gesticulating, so I'll let her ask the question.
So I just want to step back 1 second and understand, how do you collect the data for the dashboard? Is that something that's automatically outputted from the devices? Or is it just, you know, the standard way the data is, and you guys are just using Excel to upload that data?
Sure. That's a great question. So the ways that we have worked traditionally is their devices connect online in some capacity, and they upload the data in some format out to, some of them, they upload binary files that just sit in like AWS. Some of them have the devices write directly to databases and expose the data. With the binary files, they obviously need like some kind of intermediary step where there is file processing, but it ultimately gets put in some form of database where the data can then be read and used. So we're typically interacting with their databases that their engineers have figured out how to get off of the devices via online transmission.
So I'm just going to assume, since you guys have a quality system specialist, that's all validated, that you guys provide the validation for any type of data transfer into your, because I'm assuming these dashboards they're making decisions off of, correct? Or that's a incorrect assumption?
Most of them are post-procedural data. That's the majority of use cases that we experience. So if they're making decisions, it's sort of abstractly like, oh, this case didn't go that well. Like, I got lost trying to navigate like these bronchial passages. Here's what I can learn from that for future cases. But we have in the past done some pre-planning, but yeah, all of that is validated systems. There's a lot of regulatory and paperwork that goes into a lot of this. When they're uploading their data, like we're not sending data out to them that they're utilizing in the procedure itself. So we're not really ever categorized as software as a medical device, but we do have to go through some degrees of regulation and assist them in paperwork for filing with like FDA compliance.
That's interesting to me. Why wouldn't you be SaaS?
So software as a medical device is a very specific designation that requires a tremendous amount of overhead and administrative burden to prove. Like, so when your software is a medical device, that means that your software is critical to the operation of the medical device itself. Like, in the OR.
see.
And our software that we write typically is not, it can't affect the procedure itself, is usually what we're producing. So we try to dodge that designation and make life easier for everyone.
Yeah, but you're also missing one element. So you're actually using this as a quality system application, and therefore that as a quality system application has to be validated for its intended use, because you're making a decision from a quality system perspective. That's the validation question I'm asking. I'm not asking from a product development scenario.
Well, let me jump in there. Because Nelly, it sounds like what you're asking, I may not have a correct understanding. I thought someone just said, maybe Justin, it was you, that this data, the physician looks at this data post-procedure and kind of self-reflects on how did the procedure go. Nelly, it almost sounds like you're talking about this data is going back to the med device company and being used by them. And those are different things. So I'm confused a bit.
Is that my confusion? Am I crossing lines there? Because I'm seeing the application being able to use during clinical trials and scenarios like that. Is that a wrong assumption?
Justin, help us out. Which one is it?
Sure. So it depends on the audience, but yeah, we're not really driving like clinical trials or anything like that.
Okay, my bad. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. So we do support exposing data. Like the client has the device, they have engineers that have built it, and they do test it. And the data, even from those tests, gets uploaded, and we present that after the fact to various engineers. Also, we have engineering portals and engineering dashboards, but that's for them to help look at the logs that are generated off of the robot, understand what faults may be occurring, what maybe looks like there were calibration issues. So there is some like quality associated with it, but we ran procedures. We want to look at that data afterwards and understand and maybe make future decisions based off of it. But any kind of trial itself, any kind of operation of the robot, that is like the function of it, the execution of it, that's not related to the things that we build, at least.
If I go to this webinar and I go through the first 20 minutes of it, then I get out of it and I open it up on my phone. Oh, there you go.
Well, I'm calibrated. Sorry, guys. Thank you for your calibrating there.
Sure.
Does that answer the question? I'm not sure if I was helpful or not.
It does. Well, so I was seeing applications where dashboards can be used during the design development phase. And then when you're doing it through that phase, then you actually could be making decisions with those dashboards. Because one of the challenges is the amount of data collected during design development for all the different protocols, reports, even just general data analysis. So that's where I was crossing my wires, because I was thinking it was being used at that point.
Gotcha.
But Nelly, it does sound like, some of that data would feed back into 6304 problem resolution process if they're generating fault logs. So yeah, I think it does sound like it has that QMS connection there.
Well, I want to go to Sam's, but we can have lunch and then I can go to Sam's.
Who's speaking right now? It's on here.
It's Larry.
Maybe that was Larry's.
Oh,
Having a side meeting.
I'm open to lunch anytime.
Right. From a compliance standpoint, I just looked this up while Justin was answering all the hard questions. Apparently, we help out with GXP compliance and non-product software validation. Those are the couple things that we've helped out with specifically recently for the devices we work with.
I only bring it up because so many people are adverse to doing anything automation during design control, because then you have to validate it, and the cost of validation is usually 2 to 3 times the cost. And so that's why I was asking the question.
Gotcha.
You guys are providing one of the things I'm doing is I provide a certificate of conformance for some things I validate that I'm using my system. And then that way it lowers the cost for the customer, the customer over time. So I was just seeing if you guys had something similar.
Yeah, it's not normally something that we end up ancillary to that. Usually the customers themselves are filing. They have business analysts, they have people on staff that are handling a lot of the assembly, validation, compliance documentation. So they reach out to us for design documents that they may need to supplement it, help answer questions, maybe craft some of the requirements, some of the code explanations, things like that. So we do support them in that endeavor, but we're not usually the ones taking point with those submissions.
I think I speak for many people when I say, Michael, what's on slide 4?
So we've talked some about the problems itself, starting to get into these best practices. That's kind of the promise of what we had going into this. So we've some of this stuff I think we're kind of like touching on as we're going through some of these various explanations, but one of the best practices that we're talking about is like picking the right data. I think the big thing that we're trying to prevent is data overwhelm, that dashboard overwhelm where you log in and there's just information just all over the screen. And how do you pick the right pathway, right? And each of the different user cases that we're talking about here have a different pathway, have a different set of needs around what they're trying to accomplish. So some of the physicians that we work with specifically, like, they're logging in. These are the use cases that we see. They're trying to review their case. They're trying to export information so that they can go deliver a talk on, hey, I used the XYZ robot and look what it did for my procedures. Look at how great it is for all these different things that I'm able to do. They're exporting out the PowerPoint information. They're reviewing their procedural video, all of that kind of stuff. That's what the physicians are doing. Then you've also got groups like hospital admins, researchers. We talked some about the engineers that need to interact with the information itself. So they're all needing something different. They're all trying to solve different problems. So in a lot of cases, we're developing entirely separate portals based off of that same set of data, right? And exposing different types of data. One of the things that Justin really helped explain to me around our approach to this is giving people that quick overview and then allowing the deep dive to go as granular as they want to go with some of that kind of information. So I'm a marketer. So the thing that comes to mind for me is like Google Analytics and systems like that, and seeing like, hey, you had this many page views is interesting at a glance, but to really understand like what that means and how that's impacted overall interaction, that sort of stuff, that's where you need to be able to dig deeper. That's what we provide for all these different groups that are interacting. So one way to get ahead of that, right? Like the way that getting in and picking the right data, because it's very easy to kind of armchair quarterback that and say like, oh, well, clearly that dashboard failed because they didn't pick the right data. So getting ahead of that as much as you can, interacting with the different user groups that you're going to be working with, trying to make sure that you're getting, hey, this is what I'd like to see most clearly. This is the kind of stuff that I'd like to be able to know about. Second guideline, and I don't know if I inadvertently colored on the bottom of the slide there with that red line. I didn't put that there initially, so just letting everybody know. Yeah, I got a question before we move on.
I do. I was waiting till the end of the slide to see if the next slide was going to cover it, but it sounds like you're going in a different direction. Mm-hmm. I wanted to make the connection between the data and then the data that the questions is trying to answer. So kind of starting with why, to say, what questions are you trying to answer? This is something I struggle with when I work with a team to try to build a management review or other data analysis. Mm-hmm. I found it helpful to focus on, what questions are you actually trying to answer? A lot of times that can lead us in a different direction of data than just looking at what data we have or what data looks sexy, mm-hmm. or getting people to point to different parts of the data. So I was wondering if you had any process to try to really understand what questions are people trying to answer. Or is it really more about, what kind of metrics do you want to see?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's something that I really push with my clients as well. The way I usually frame it is that I need to know the problem they're trying to solve, because I find often they'll dive straight into real minutia, like drill down heavily into details, get fixated on, I need this button to say this, I need like this column right here, and they get lost in the weeds. And I always try to pull them back and ask them about their problems and try to explain to them that my job is to understand their problems so that I can craft a good solution, because I've been there multiple times. Like, we know how to do this. And I think getting them to step back and give problem statements, or like you were saying, right? Why is, I think we're both driving it, like why we need an answer, or why they need this. So that's definitely the approach that we take as well.
That's reassuring. I was going to say, where are you finding these teams? You can just jump straight to the data. You don't need to talk about problems or questions. You just go straight to the data. That'd be amazing.
Yeah. That in my experience, that rarely ends up giving them what they want.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I think someone else.
Yep. I just want to note that you guys have really hit something here, because it's rare that we're at slide 6 at this point. Like there's so many people, you've definitely at kind of the cross section of a problem here that people are trying to get their heads around. So timely and appreciated. Maren?
Oh, I'm not getting your audio. I see you talking.
User error. While she's doing that, I'll let her know that I went to our Mediterranean kitchen this week. We live near one another, and that's like where we have our dates. And
Yes.
I got the Euro salad, and I didn't really enjoy it.
Oh, I always get the shawarma plate.
I do too, but I just wasn't. Anyhow.
It's great to see that you're looking at the buttons and the links. Do you also incorporate the usability standards like 62366 and even 60601 has some on usability into the discussions that you have with your clients?
I'm not familiar with those specific standards. I know that we do web application development, and we definitely care a tremendous amount about accessibility and typically follow the WCAG guidelines for the Web Consortium. Accessibility guidelines is what it stands for. So yeah, like Michael has a slide on here, and there's a box covering accessibility. So those are factors that we consider. We have a really strong design team that develops directly in HTML, CSS, and yeah, we always make sure that things are legible, that the markup supports screen readers for people with visual impairments, that colors and have like the right levels of like contrast, they don't bleed into each other, that people with like color blindness impairments are able to see. So that's something that we consider from the very beginning.
From the
And I
validation
don't-
standpoint, I'll just say that a lot of the teams that we've worked with in the past, it's generally they want to control those kind of final pieces and final check boxes to make sure that, yes, everything's working the way it should. But the processes that we use fit very well with what they're trying to accomplish.
Okay, yeah, and it doesn't sound like it would change what you were doing, but it might be an additional marketing credibility thing if you could point to those standards and say, yes, we meet these medical standards.
Sure.
That's a good note. Thank you. Awesome. So I'll back up just to kind of very quickly cover, again, being the marketing guy, like talking about the branding guidelines seems like something that is more just, hey, how do we keep marketing happy? But this really is something where we've come into some projects later on, and there were some decisions made at a very fundamental level that required some major overhaul in order to get marketing happy, right? How do you keep that same kind of corporate look and feel all the way through? There's a lot that goes into that. And just in the interest of time, we'll keep on rolling there. But just know that, hey, again, if at the beginning you can think about this, you're going to save yourself a lot of budget and time. Justin, do you want to kind of talk through any of the specifics here around like page hierarchy, navigation, that sort of thing, around why this is so important from a user experience standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to allowing people to find what they're looking for. Like you'd mentioned, like a dashboard that has everything just dumped onto that page. It's almost impossible to find what you're looking for unless you're already a power user in the system. And you can't assume when you have a wide audience that you're gonna have an opportunity to train everybody up. And especially when you start having external users, like you're selling this product to customers, you're asking them to come in here. If they can't find what they need, they bounce very quickly, they get frustrated. And yeah, if you're trying to commercialize, that's a very, very bad way to get started. So understanding the different pathways, understanding how you structure the data, making sure it's accessible on various devices. Like you can't control whether somebody goes and looks at your website on a phone or not. So just saying, oh, it's supposed to only work on a desktop machine or at a certain like large enough resolution. People are still going to log in. They're going to have a bad experience and you're damaging your credibility. So just understanding all of these things at the start and having somebody who has expertise in that, I think, is really critical. A lot of times this stuff isn't really thought through. I know a lot of times we've worked with teams that had, I guess, what they call UI UX designers that came up with basically static mock-ups and then said, go translate this. And then got very upset when it wasn't workable and we had to revise it tremendously to actually work responsibly so that you can see it on all kinds of different devices, where they fail to factor in that names sometimes are very, very long and they can cause line breaks and then shatter their design. And I think just having people who understand this and are close to the end result to provide input earlier on is really important.
Yeah, and that kind of really does highlight sort of a difference between, one of the things that we were talking about earlier. There's with one of the teams where they had a desktop-based application. If you are trying to get in front of a wider audience, how are you going to engage them? The answer that we use for that is by going through online tools. And there's all of the different permissions that have to happen and logins and all of that fun kind of stuff to keep everything secure, right? But a lot of times we definitely have come into a process where it's a desktop only kind of scenario, and then you're doing some major transformation in order to try to get to where it is more usable.
On a related note, I'd invite everyone on the call at some point in the next month, log on to your own websites on your phone. That's all.
Yeah. Agreed. And then the last best practice that we just wanted to throw in here.
Me too.
It's great.
Sorry,
What's
go
that?
ahead.
No.
He's dying for an example. That we're hoping that you have maybe an anonymized something that we could see a sample of your work. I don't know if that's in today's presentation.
Unfortunately, because these are all proprietary systems in terms of like, hey, this is, company XYZ, they don't really want all their information showed off. So I don't, unfortunately. One of the things that, it's actually something that I'll pause for a second and just say that one of the things that I've been kicking around in my head and would be interested in everybody's feedback on, like there's definitely like a lot of publicly available data, right? Like you can go to different government websites, all that kind of stuff, and just get information that's out there, just large data sets. Is whether or not it would be useful for people to see how our team could develop that kind of material to make it useful for people, so that you can look at something like that and go like, oh, now I get why I should use this particular team to help me with the data over here. It's different kinds of data, but I haven't approached Justin with that idea yet until I got some sort of validation from somebody else that, hey, this is worth our time and effort to go build this thing.
Luke and I seem to be of the same mind this morning. He's saying, how do you sell through to a prospect? Don't they want to, can you show me a sample of something? I mean, you must have something that you show them.
Justin, how would you talk about that?
Yeah, I don't have a great answer for that, actually. Most of the people we work with have been usually there's some form of like referral process occurring. There's some kind of like trust that already occurs. We've rarely engaged with a client that doesn't have any idea who we are prior to having a conversation with them.
That opens a whole nother can of worms, doesn't it? But
I will say that the most recent client that we're working with did see the previous dashboard that we had developed.
That was because it was part of the same division but a different product, and they were looking for ways to collaborate with this other product developer, and they're like, oh, this dashboard, this is exactly the kind of thing we need. Who did that? And they directed them to us. So that's often how we find additional clients and expand at the moment.
Anonymize or redact or something, because the best example I can give is in my line of work where I'm helping someone tell a story and they're like, well, can you give me an example? Which rarely comes up like you say, but I can say, well, here's a situation where a company was saying this. And I said, I don't know what that means. And we iterated until I said, do you mean this? And they were like, yeah, that really says it. And I'm showing that I took what was a thought and I said, is this something you could say? And like, but first we said this, and I said, can you this, can you that, can you that? And they're like, it's like asking why until you're
sure.
Anyone who's on the phone is a parent, like, why? Because I said so is the final answer. So that kind of thing, I have to imagine there's some like, here was the ridiculous unstructured data we started with. These were the kinds of things that they needed. And while I can't show you the actual columns and rows and, primary navigational menu items, I can say this was a reasonable structure. And perhaps that is really what you sell. We can take, Justin, you seem to be like the guy who's doing a lot of the engineering and programming and figuring out how to make it. You must have a mind for how to take the unstructured and make it reasonable. There's got to be an example, not today, but I'd encourage you to do that. Paul and John. Paul first.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Yeah, having sold tens of millions of dollars of custom, IT services and solutions in the pharmaceutical space, it is a challenge. But the way I think you address it is, first you pick a niche, and you really, it's not simple. My assessment is that you have to really think about what your brand is. If your brand is, we are thinkers and we solve problems and we connect data that is mission critical and solve specific business problems, and can then build a public identity around that, versus saying we built the solution. If you anchor on the finished product of what you did with the past client, you get pigeonholed. But I think if you get smarter about talking about capabilities in your brand, and then in context, the solution you develop, I think you'll have a much better chance of closing deals. And unfortunately, especially in the medical space, every industry thinks they're very unique. From an IT perspective, it's just data. It's always easy to connect. But getting domain expertise and domain credibility is key, which translates to focus. But I would say lean on building an identity around capabilities of integrating data for specific business situations would be the best way to challenge that.
Thank you, Paul. John?
Yeah, 50% of my time is in aerospace. So I'm working with a company that works with the Boeings and Lockheeds and some of the big rocket new projects and things like that. And I noticed there's quite a bit of difference between that and medical device. I spent probably 25 years in medical devices, maybe coming up to 30, including the company that you're talking about that you don't want to name. I spent 4 years there on robotic laparoscopic surgery and stuff like that. But in the aerospace industry, it's common practice to have a use case. They want to see that before they go into any depth. They want to see the story, as Joe's calling it. And it's done often without mentioning the name of the company. But it's done in such a way that they can see the reasoning behind it and they have a practical example. But I don't see that done as much in the medical device industry.
Awesome. I'm definitely writing notes, guys. So thank you so much. I really do appreciate the feedback here, because we really have, like Justin said, we really have, through a lot of the business that we've built over the years, has been some sort of relationship, some sort of connection. And we're trying to scale that and trying to get past that. So this is super helpful feedback.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I could jump in just one more time on that specific note, just my experience, we built a connector between Siebel and Documentum, right? And built automations for a very specific requirement for off-label medical information, right? For pharmaceutical companies, which is a validated 21 CFR Part 11 in eco environment. So here we had no pharmaceutical experience. I was going after insurance companies and such for the same, connecting Siebel and Documentum. But what we learned was we were masters connecting Siebel and Documentum. And the first deal I closed was with Amgen. When they said something like this, they said, well, thanks for the connector. It was, I think, $29,000 for the users. And we've got PwC and we've got Accenture, somebody else like that. And they've got 1,500 Siebel consultants. The other team's got 700 document consultants. And I said, I got 2 consultants who know how to integrate the data between the two, right? And I stole a $1.5 million deal from them. With that one experience, then I went on and I sold $10.5 million in 18 months because we had that one data point, right?
Yeah.
So my point is, you first have to anchor in on, hey, we know the data, we know how to connect information, the data points you need to solve your business problem, and just really get humble on that and say, you help me figure out the use case. I know the data, I can solve it first. And if you build that brand, guess what? Then you can solve problems and then be the experts, even though other people don't have domain experience, but you're the guy that can do things other people can't do. And especially in today's world, I think, the ability to connect patent databases, public and private, if they got user names and accesses and all that. I did that with a company called Zacta many years ago. sold GE, sold Delta, sold, Coca-Cola, simply because we were the back-end data guys presenting dashboards on the front end with BI. But anyway, we can get into more of that. But my experience has been, it's not simple. It's like you got to do both. You've got to be able to demonstrate your ability on the tech side, and then also say, well, but I really know your business. And it's like everybody wants everything. So
You're both on premium, so you can just Slack one another after this. So thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, Paul's done a little bit of coaching for us already, so I'm soaking it all up. I'm writing it down. So thank you.
Now you wrote a book. Go on.
I've heard.
I'll show you. I keep a copy on my table now.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. Are there more slides, Michael, or we'll just go to gallery here?
And then I'll say, just as a recap, just so everybody has that quick, just finding the right data. Again, look at your brand guidelines, make sure that you're making it accessible for all your devices, and then review the data and make sure that you're continuing to develop.
Thank you.
Certainly.
So that all makes sense for me. I think you heard a number of, thank you, Nellie. I think a number of us said we'd love to see examples where you can. Rains and Marin, I know there are other folks who aren't on camera right now who are interested on the quality side. Do you feel your questions were addressed? Do you think that there's an opportunity here that they're missing? What's your takeaway from today's presentation?
Yeah, I feel like I had my questions directly answered about, they did focus on problems and questions, not just data. I think that's how I was making my strongest connection to the quality system side of things. Maybe somebody who's more of a marketing expert than me. I don't know if that could be part of your branding process to say, this is our proprietary process where we, get to know your data better than you know it, and we'll take it to the next level with our dashboarding expertise. I don't know. That's definitely where my interest area lies, just in terms of connecting with those teams, figuring out what's important to build an analysis around that. That's directly relatable to what I do. So maybe some of your clients will find that interesting too. I don't know if you could use that as a selling point if you have a particular process around that. I think I just saw, oh, you do some interviews and things like that, and it didn't sound sexy or interesting.
Ranger came up specifically for the clickbait of dashboard. Was this a bit askew from what you really need, or is there a utility?
I thought this was going to be more from a medical device company dashboard perspective to say, how are our operations going? How is our quality management system performing? That's just my lens that I had. That's the assumptions that I made.
Maybe that's an opportunity that Justin and Michael can. It seems like a logical, adjacent thing to offer.
Words in there,
if I could jump in, that's a beautiful what you just said, Rains. That's just an amazing use case, right? Every medical device company needs that dashboard, which is, hey, what's my cluster, all the way from the cluster information and data of every device out there in the market, if it's talking back, what's, how is the data being used? This, because again, that'll improve user experience, usability testing. There's so much of, and guess what? The product guys will have one lens, the financial guys will have another lens, the marketing guys will have another lens, product development would like to get a collective and feedback for the feedback loop. And each one of them doesn't have the ability to think through that use case, but you guys do, because it's all about connecting data points.
That's such a good point.
Around that, it'll be amazing.
Michael, Justin, I don't know if you know what we're talking about, but medical device companies are required to have a quote unquote management review of quality related data that shows their quality system is implemented and effective. And the data you're providing, it sounds like that could be, it likely should be fed back into that management review process. So maybe you could extend your services by getting to know that a little bit, and that could be something unique about your brand to say, we also help you bring that, bring the conclusions back into your quality management system management review.
David, you politely raised your hand in the back of the room. I'm David.
Thank you for that. Justin and Michael, fantastic presentation, really intrigued. Some of my experience in working with larger databases, there are two things that sort of bother me when it comes to working with those databases. One is the frequency of them updating that would then feed back into the dashboard. And sometimes it's on schedule or off schedule, and the challenges that could hold. And the second thing, and this is the issue, is when they QC on the back end and they reload in order to fix something. Any thoughts about your experience with getting uploads that are different from the original upload, instead of cumulatively uploading it to going back and changing things early on, and how that may be potentially providing some challenges in understanding the data, you know?
Yeah.
Maybe it's not.
What's that?
Maybe it's not. I don't know. So I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's a really good question. I'm thinking about one of our biggest clients right now, and they have a middleware layer that they support where they handle the processing in the back end and then expose the data via APIs. So the APIs they lock down and ensure are always very consistent, that they only make additive changes. So I think that helps with how we utilize the data and making sure it's reliably structured and rarely breaks anything. There's absolutely risks with dealing with the databases directly, where they can make changes that we're unaware of, and then it could inadvertently break our systems. So it's just something where we always have to kind of work with them and encourage them to establish a more robust process, validate anything, test it before they make a production change. There's definitely ways to handle that nowadays with cloud-based versus like on-premises management of these tools. So we try to push them towards some kind of orchestration and automation where it's more known, there's less risk involved, there's less risk of human error. But yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and something that definitely is always a risk. And even with all these controls in place, even with this API exposed data, things break sometimes, they make mistakes. So yeah, I think it's often about trying to make sure that's happening in some kind of dev environment with robust testing so that you can catch it before it sneaks into production.
Marin?
So I appreciate the comments about feedback for the quality management system. I think there's another opportunity here. It takes the software a little bit more into the regulatory side, as Nellie was referring to earlier. But one of the things that is huge for companies to demonstrate is that they are continuing to monitor performance of a product in the field, and that they are updating that product performance, particularly around usability. Right? Usability is a really big thing to demonstrate for medical products. So it would take you more into that validated product realm, but it's a potential ongoing need for medical companies, medical device companies, that you may be able to help them fill.
Yeah, definitely. We do support that to a degree. I think of one of the portals that we have for one of our clients is a field service portal. So they actually have their field service engineers that go out to remediate problems with the devices at the customers' hospitals. And the robots self-report when they identify errors. There's certain like parameters that they have where they understand that something has gone wrong, and they categorize that into varying degrees of risk. So they have like extremely high, like medium, low risk, and they can see the map as a whole. So we do help surface that data for their teams to use for diagnostic purposes and to act before even a customer necessarily knows that something's wrong. So it makes a lot of sense that we can lean into that more and step more into the validation side of things. But I know that a lot of the work we do does support those teams who are probably dealing with these kinds of validation.
Justin, I invite you to come back in 2 weeks. Marin will be our featured presenter, and she's going to be talking about QMS systems. And
awesome.
Perhaps if in these 2 weeks you do have any kind of mock-up or something that is relevant here that you want to show, I'm sure she wouldn't mind giving you that airtime if it furthers her discussion about how to improve your QMS. Next week, we're talking about a fast approaching deadline, FDA for UDI in September on the 24th. And I have a frequent 10X presenter, a friend of mine, Gary Sainer, who will be here. He is with Read Tech, and he will definitely deliver on on that promise. If there's nothing else for today, I will say have a great weekend, everyone. Michael, Justin, nice job today. Thank you. A lot of questions, which indicates pain and interest. So
Thank you for all the feedback, everybody.
It's really
we'll
appreciated.
recording, and you can comb through it and make your offer even more robust.
Excellent.
What where before we go, where are you, Luke? You're on mute still.
You're on mute.
Maybe it's going to be too loud for him to.
Oh,
Where are you?
I'm in a harbor on a sailboat with Marike, and it's a hacking camp with about 3,000 hackers. They also hack medical devices, so I'm pretty comfortable here.
Most people would call that vacation time and not call into a Zoom meeting about dashboards, but you are a strange animal.
Okay, thank you very much.
Did you bring the puppy with you? No puppy. All right. Well, thanks for calling in. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.